My mum had passed away last year, and my daughter had a really close relationship. She spent a lot of time with her gran, bringing her up, and had a very close bond with her. But when she passed away, she really struggled to show emotion, and obviously, as a you find that really difficult because that's the first thing you think when you're grieving. You cry and show emotion, but she didn't show any. And we speak about my mum and we show pictures and things, but how do we support her? Because I'm frightened that long term she has this loss, but is not able to grieve like we normally do.
Yeah, really good question. Autistic people need to grieve in their own way, and this is one of the. This is a really touchy subject, and feel free to make up your own minds. Definitely, I haven't got all of the answers at all. But one of the things that worry me, genuinely, let's take it away from death, and just make it a bit more generic, just to make it a bit more easier to digest in a way. If there's an issue with a child, okay, or with anybody, and we think, okay, fantastic, this is what's helped other people, whatever it might be. So counselling or support in any way, shape or form. So therefore, this is what we'll offer this particular person. And that's often what we do. That's what services are for. If there is no translation to take autism into account around how we go about that support, then the risk of that support being ineffectual or even damaging, in my view, goes up. Okay, so in your example, June, if hypothetically you were to take an autistic child to a grief counsellor who doesn't know that the child is autistic or doesn't have an understanding of autism, and they do the best grief counselling in the world for a predominant neurotype child, then the chances of it being problematic for the autistic child, the risk goes up. So my view is that any approach has to have not just knowledge of autism, but that level of specificity of understanding that particular child at that particular time, and because that is going to change over time as well. So the whole concept of how a child grieves is going to differ if that child is autistic. We know autistic people do grieve in different ways. So my concern is if there's a perhaps reliance on grieving in a particular way that most of the PNT. So say, for example, saying to an autistic child, it's perfectly okay to cry. If that child doesn't demonstrate grief in that way, then all that's going to do is stress the child out even more, in my view. Or if you make the child feel bad because they're not demonstrating grief. So I think it's one of those areas which, again, it's very uncomfortable for people to talk about, but we should be. We should be absolutely talking about death, puberty, sexual relationships, these sorts of things that are qualitatively different for the autistic person often, and the way in which we broach them should be qualitatively different as well. Otherwise, we're going to get it potentially horribly wrong. So, June, in terms of your question, which is a fantastic question, for me, it would be understanding that particular child and how they do actually communicate anything, let alone grief. And the other thing to in terms of, first of all, you can't intellectualize an emotional reaction. So there's a total disparity, often a total disparity between an intellectual understanding of something and one's emotional reaction. That's why reasoning, in that sense, saying, oh yeah, it's so going back to the anxiety, you don't need to feel anxious because of X, Y, and Z, and you explain it at an intellectual level. But if that's still something that causes me anxiety, it still causes me anxiety, whether I can reason it or not. It doesn't make any difference. It still causes me anxiety. In fact, it might make it worse because then I just feel really stupid because I know I shouldn't feel anxious, but I still do. As opposed to saying, yes, this does cause you anxiety. What are we going to do about it? They're two very, very different things. In the same way with grief, if this makes you feel bad, that's totally understandable. What are we going to do about it? How are we going to work through this while recognizing that it is actually quite traumatic, because death can be traumatic. So trying to make it lesser somehow is problematic in and of itself. some people have emotional reactions that are, I hate to say the word delayed, because actually, again, going back to that normalization, it's perfectly normal for autistic people. Perfectly okay for a year or 2 years or 5 years, and then all of a sudden for things to come crashing down. So being prepared for that and accepting that that's perfectly normal, perfectly normally autistic, rather than sort of going, oh, well, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you sad? What's the problem? You know, all of those sorts of things. And again, it's that level of tangibility around, you know, has there been a funeral? Has the person been allowed to understand what is their concept of death, and all of those sorts of things as well.
Thank you.
I don't know if we ever got round to Gordon. I was quite excited then. Oh, Jenny, I think you're muted now.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Good. Gordon has left a comment in the chat box. Are you able to see it, Luke?
Oh, I probably could if I clicked on the right button. Oh, crikey.